Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy. Now, this one, Fallen Angels by Mike Lee. This is an unusual one because it is a direct follow-up to Descent of Angels, which was the first book to deal with the First Legion, the Dark Angels. I had a very weird experience with this one. I was talking to my co-host Adam about it recently, and one of the things that came up, one of the things I mentioned is that from my first reading of the book, which was a long time ago, I mean, I will say that, I can remember not a damn thing about it. And when I say nothing, I mean absolutely nothing. I can't remember about the characters, I can't remember what happens, I can't remember a single thing about it. And usually that's a very bad sign indeed, because it was a long time ago since I last read Horus Rising or False Gods, but I can remember lots of details of them, but I couldn't remember a damn thing about this book. And having read it through again, I think that is a rather unfair assessment. I think it is rather unfair because it's a book of two halves. There's half a very, very, very good story straining to get through here, which is the story that author Mike Lee wanted to tell. And then there's the other half, which is the half that he was kind of obliged to put in place so that there was something to punctuate it, something to fill out the running time of the book. The first half of the book deals with events on Caliban. We are taken back to Caliban after the Imperium is established, after the Dark Angels Legion is well established. Caliban is now an imperial world that is changing dramatically from what it used to be. Its cultures are changing, its topography is changing as areas are torn up and transformed, entire forests are being done away with, mountain ranges are being demolished, ancient villages and townships are being torn up, and in their places you're getting the imperial cities and manufacturers and all of that, the training camps and that kind of thing. Caliban is very fast becoming a fortress world of a Space Marine Legion. And that's where all the intrigue happens. That is the good half of the story. That's the part of the story that author Mike Lee wanted to tell. Because after there's a short story in Tales of Heresy, the last collection that we took a look at, that features the Dark Angels, in which, for reasons that are kind of ambiguous, Lionel Johnson splits the fleet of the Dark Angels into two. And he retains all of the Dark Angels that came from Terra with him out in the Great Crusade, but he sends Luther, his second in command, and all of the Dark Angels that derive from Caliban back home. It's a really weird move. We as the reader know why it happens. You're going to have to read the short story in Tales of Heresy because I don't really want to spoil it here. We kind of know why it happens, but most of the Dark Angels don't. They don't understand why they've been sent home. They don't understand why they're not part of the Great Crusade anymore. And they notice, they realise that all of the ones who have been sent home are Calibanites in origin. They're not the Dark Angels of Terra. And that starts to rankle. That's the core of the confusion and the bitterness that eventually leads to Luther's fall to the powers of chaos, the conversion of the Dark Angels on Caliban to become the Fallen Angels, and the eventual destruction of Caliban following the Horus Heresy. It's really interesting seeing how the seeds of discontent are sown very, very early on. What I really like about this half of the story, more than anything, is that it is the story of Luther. You really get to see the torment that this guy goes through. He doesn't entirely understand why he's been abandoned, why Lionel Johnson, not only his Primarch, but kind of his foster son, is treating him this way. But it goes way deeper than that. In all of the background stuff about Luther, all you really get about him is the generalized overview that, he's driven mad by bitterness and jealousy. He falls to the Chaos Powers and becomes a lunatic overlord and blah, blah, blah. The boring stuff, essentially. He's just a villain, he's just an antagonist for Lionel Johnson. Here, he's a deeply conflicted and interesting guy. He is loyal. He is loyal to Lionel Johnson. He is loyal to the Imperium and to the Dark Angels, but he starts to see things. You have to bear in mind, Luther is born of Caliban. He's an old veteran of Caliban, and he sees what's happening. He sees what the Imperium is doing to the peoples of Caliban, to the land itself. The whole topography of Caliban is being destroyed. The forests, the mountains, everything. But not only that, the peoples of Caliban are effectively being sold into slavery. They are just becoming workers in the great manufactories and whatnot, and if not that, then soldiers to be fed into the imperial meat grinder. And he doesn't like it. And he starts to blame Johnson for bringing that to Caliban. And the way the book frames it, you can well understand. You can well understand because the Imperium is an occupying force that has conquered Caliban effectively. And you have these terrorist groups rising up who start to unsettle Calibanite imperial society because they remember the old ways. They remember what Caliban used to be, and they actually do start to talk to Luther and to make their point to him. And yeah, it makes sense. It actually makes sense. Beyond the predations of chaos, beyond whatever exaggerating or distorting or warping effect that the forces of chaos have. And there is chaos here on this planet. In fact, one of the things that's uncovered is that there's something very chaotic innate to Caliban. There is some chaotic influence within the planet itself. And what Luther realizes is if the Imperium catches wind of this, then they will just obliterate Caliban and probably everyone on it. So he keeps that from the Imperium. He takes pains to make sure that they don't know. And it's so interesting being inside Luther's head. It's so interesting seeing how he's so conflicted because he's still loyal to Lionel Johnson. He still wants to be part of the Imperium. But at the same time, there is this bitterness, there is this sense that everything is being torn from him and that the world he knows is not being protected, it's actually being torn up and obliterated before his very eyes. The culture that he once swore to protect is being destroyed and corroded around him. And you see that. I mean, that is not a delusion. That is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. The Imperium is utterly obliterating Caliban. It's turning it into just this soulless manufactory world where the people are essentially slaves and there's nothing left to protect. It is true. You get to see a little bit of the ambiguity here, and I like that. I really like that. It's a situation in which there are no good answers and there are no good sides to be taken. It's a very, very dark situation indeed, and I love that, and I love that part of the story. I really like that. The other half, it flits back and forth between Caliban and the Great Crusade, where you've got Lionel Johnson and the other Dark Angels learning of Horus's treachery and then going on a kind of half-cocked mission of their own, a kind of a mission of sabotage and subterfuge into the Istvan system, where they intend to scupper a planet, a sort of manufactory planet that is going to be fueling Horus's forces during the Istvan conflict. And it's kind of, it's perfunctory. It's absolutely perfunctory. You really don't get much of Lionel Johnson, which is a shame. I would have liked to have gotten a little bit more about him and about how he feels about what's going on Caliban, for example. But you get nothing of that. You get absolutely nothing. This is the bolter-porn section. This is just the action set pieces, and it's kind of dull, I've got to say. You can, if they don't even feed into the wider story, so you can, and this is what I did after a while with this reading, you can just flip through them, just ignore them, and just read the bits on Caliban, because that's the story. That's the story. That's where all the intrigue is. Nothing much really happens in the Lionel Johnson side of the story. The only thing that is interesting is the end of that part of the story, because Lionel Johnson thinks he's won. He thinks he's done something really clever and scuppered all of Horus's plans for the Istvan system with barely a soldier lost, you know? But it turns out that he's bragging about this to Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, who, unbeknownst to him, is already fallen, is already loyal to Horus, and he leaves this world, this manufactory world, in the hands of Perturabo, who he believes to be loyal, who of course isn't. So he screwed himself through his arrogance and through his ambition, because he wants to be named the new War Master. That's what he sees here in Horus's defection. He sees opportunity. He scuppered himself completely, and potentially the wider Imperium as well. So that's interesting. But beyond that, there's nothing really much in this side of the story. But the stuff on Caliban is great. All the characters are interesting. You get a little bit more about what the Lord Cypher is. You learn that the Lord Cypher is a position within the Dark Angels. He's not the name Cypher is not the name of a person. It's a title. It's an honorific that's given to a particular Dark Angel who has a particular function within the Legion. It's really quite sinister. It's strange. You don't really know what the Lord Cypher is doing here, and whether this Lord Cypher is the Cypher that we know from the present day of the 40k universe. It's hard to tell. There are suggestions, there are little inklings as to who he might be, but that is it. This one, it's kind of difficult to recommend. It's half of a really good book. Half of a really good book, but you can't help but think they should have just done away with the stuff with Lionel Johnson, or just referred to it vaguely and focused really deeply on what's going on Caliban and fleshed it out a lot more. It would have been a much stronger book for that. A much stronger book. And it's a shame that they didn't. It's a real shame that they didn't allow for that. It's worth reading if you like the Dark Angels and if you like their background and if you want to know what their status was in the Horus Heresy. That's kind of interesting. But beyond that, all of the cards, all of the interesting stuff happens on Caliban. It's with what the characters who will ostensibly become the traitors. Although with the Dark Angels, that's kind of up in the air, is it not? It's all a little bit ambiguous. Yeah, Luther is the most interesting character in this entire book. Also, the character Zahariel, who is the subordinate Dark Angel librarian that you see Luther through, who is sort of the protagonist of that side of the book. He's actually really interesting because he's massively conflicted too. He's a loyalist Dark Angel who at the same time sees all of the problems that the Imperium is causing on Caliban, and he totally understands how the other Dark Angels feel being cast aside and being reprimanded to Caliban itself. It's a weird situation. It's a really weird situation. But yeah, interesting book, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. One you can skip if you're not that interested in the Dark Angels, I will say that, because it doesn't really feed into the wider story very much. So yeah, I think next time we're moving on to some of my favourites, so stay tuned, ladies and gents, for when we come back. Until then, bye-bye!